Hello and welcome to today's choice webinar. Today we have number 52, I think already, and the first one in March this year. And I'm super happy to welcome you to this really important topic of supply chain data and how you really make value out of it. As we all know, decarbonization needs to happen in the supply chain, and data can be part of it. So that's what we're going to have a deep dive into today with one of our partners, IBM Consulting. And before we go into that, I'm super happy to introduce you to the webinar setup. So first of all, very important, even though you can just hear me and you will not appear on stage today, we definitely invite you to become really active and also get to know everyone else who is here today in that call. And for that reason, please notice the Q&A button. So you sometimes have it on the ground or on top of your screen. And here you can type in all your questions that come up during the webinar. And we will always have a look already. And you can also comment on other people's questions or introduce what you're working on and share your insights. And to really make sure you see it, please just introduce yourself. So I also introduce myself. I'm Lara, one of the co-founders from the Climate Choice, and I'm here in Berlin. And I'm really happy to learn who are you. So maybe you just want to share your name and from where you are listening today. And I'm gonna look who will be the first who dares to share and introduce to our climate community of today. So let's see. I just look into the chat. Yet there's no one in there. You will have to break the ice. Let's see who's listening in today. So again, just find the chat either on the bottom or on top for you. And just share from where you're listening, what's your name. And we have Alex from Berlin, who's the first one today, and even shares from where he's joining or in which role. So congrats, Alex, you're first one. And Susan just joins from Erlangen, and Carla, from Italy, and another Kara from Salzburg. So now you know where to find it. More people joining in and sharing. And please make sure you also connect to the others and maybe help each other out already on questions or share links or whatever makes the webinar most valuable for you. And then the second way how you can get engaged after the webinar, because 1 hour is normally very short, is our Slack community. We have around 1,500 people joining already. And there you can just participate afterwards, contact maybe the speakers, or just share whatever you're working on or what you need help with. And then coming to us, why we are doing the webinar events. We are the Climate Choice, one of the leading platforms for decarbonizing companies and their supply chains. And we very much see that it needs data, it needs technology, but it for sure needs people to connect and make new, smart, climate relevant decisions. So this is why we have our webinars, to really connect each other and invite experts to share how they are enabling decarbonization happening in the economy. And we don't do that only in our bi-weekly webinars. We also have like one signature event, so to say, every year now. The Climate Summit, it goes this year into the 4th round. It was named one of the most important sustainability events for 2023 by Haufe. And we are very much looking forward. It happens on the 11th and the 12th of May. We have an amazing lineup of people working in that field, from corporates to NGOs and so on. Very much invite you to join. And having said that, I'm very much looking forward to go into today's webinar. And before we go and invite the experts on stage, I have a quick question for you. And the first one would be, which kind of industry background do you actually have? So from which role are you joining today? Do you come more from the manufacturing industry, from construction, real estate, transportation, finance, information, environment services, consulting, or others? There are probably a lot of industries we could still map. And I see a lot of questions or answers are coming in already. And I think I give you a few more seconds to decide. Sometimes it's also hard to if you work in different sectors as well. And I'm gonna stop it and share the results. So I see that most people actually come from manufacturing with 10%. And then there's a cut between consulting and others, and a spread between finance, wholesale, and transportation. And then I would go to a second question, and that is, what is your experience with supplier climate data so far? How much experience do you have in assessing and working with this kind of data? And first answer would be none. I'm looking to an introduction today. Or I just started working with that kind of data, or I'm well experienced and I use it, but it always helps to get more information about it, right? So you can choose from here. And looks like there's a clear leading answer. So I share the results. It's in the middle, I would say. So 50% of you are already working or are starting to work with it and are not yet the expert maybe and not the early beginner. So maybe a perfect set for today, I assume. And that's something Neele and Hugo can probably answer best. So I would invite you on stage. Hello, Neele. Hello, Hugo. How are you both today?
Very well, thanks. Thanks, Laura. And the Climate Choice, really happy to be here. Thanks for having us. Hello, everybody. Looking forward to the discussion today.
Yeah, great. Welcome. Also, Neele. Happy to have you. And did this small poll already help you? Is that what you have been assuming, how the spread out looks?
Really interesting. So I think the spread itself kind of reflects what we are seeing out there as well when we have different conversations, and we try to best kind of cover all the different levels of understanding experience here today. But then also there's obviously the opportunity for questions and discussions in the end for the beginners as well as for the experts. So we are happy to take that up and really see our input now as an impulse for you all on wherever you are in your journey, and then looking forward to the exchange.
Yeah, great. I think that's a really good point as well. So we see the people who might have already experienced, very much welcome to share that as well. And everyone who has a lot of questions, go and drop all the questions and we discuss them in the end. So first I would give the stage to you both, and I'm just listening on the side. And then I come in the end with all the questions and we do a Q&A. And I first maybe make sure that everything works with sharing the slides. And then, yes, looks good. So I'm happy to listen and then see you in a bit back. And I'm also following the chat and see which questions we have already.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Lara. And again, thanks everyone for joining us for this lunch break session, hopefully. So we're glad to be here today to talk to you about data and data value. As Lara said in the beginning, so we're collecting lots of data. There's data everywhere, but the actual value comes in if we know what to do with it. And that's something we would like to go with you through today. I'm here together with my colleague Hugo. I'll briefly introduce myself. I'm leading a practice within IBM Consulting, and we're focusing on the topic of sustainable transformation. So looking really into this transformational aspect and pull a lot of experience that we have from digital transformation actually into the world of this new or this kind of focused transformation that we're currently going on. And I hand over to Hugo.
Thanks, Neele, and hi, everybody. Yes, so I also work with Neele in the sustainability consulting team at IBM with quite a focus on ESG data management and ESG data strategy. So not just how we can kind of use the data on environmental social governance to report and meet compliance, but also how we really use it to help steer decision making towards more sustainable ways of operating and to track progress against targets. And the topic of supply chain sustainability is one close to my heart. I've recently joined IBM from the Carbon Disclosure Project, working on this topic. So looking forward to the discussion.
Fantastic, thank you. So we are here today to give you some insights and just to give you a brief overview of what to expect about in the next 35-40 minutes. We would like to give you a sense of what we see out in the market from our very close to the practice view on the different levels of maturity of organization when it comes to their sustainability transformation and how they weave sustainability into their enterprise. We would then really focus on this data piece and give you some insights on how we're operationalizing data and what are the steps, pretty practical, hopefully, with some tangible examples from clients and references that we've been working through. So you also get an insight on how that actually could be in the practice. We do focus on supplier data today, but you're going to see that also in the examples. Sometimes we go a bit broader, which should not distract you, but just rather give you the impression that some of the challenges, some of the activities, they not only focus on the supplier data, but we can always kind of bring it back to that. So as a quick introduction, maybe why we are here today as IBM and talk about sustainability, there are two kind of dimensions to this. On the one hand, we are a company that have more than 100 years of experience in technology, innovation, data, and that's really something we bring here to the table because we think that's something that can accelerate and speed up the whole progress, the whole journey we all of us have in front of us together. And we want to bring this in to make sure we can leverage the experience and the expertise from this toward the sustainability achievements. The other one is IBM itself has quite a sustainability history. So since the 1960s already, we have been starting to put out, by that time it was called environmental reports and environmental policies, so way before we come really to regulatory or even CSR reporting on this bit. And this really kind of also weaved into the DNA of this company. And when we look into kind of current targets, we're also working with our suppliers, obviously, looking into the topic of today, having a target of 100% suppliers to be engaged on really sound ESG practices, being on human rights, on social and environmental and ethics areas. And we're also obviously looking into, just to name a few, looking into some net zero emission targets to being net zero by 2030. And I think as our company, there are a lot of organizations out there, as we all know, who are putting their targets out there, publicly communicating, and with that committing to it publicly and mentioning and saying that they have their strategies in place in terms of sustainability. But we found out in a survey where we talked to over 2,000 CEOs worldwide that they actually, the minority really knows how to act on that strategy and how to operationalize it. And I think that's really interesting because there, the kind of the what seems to be rather clear, but the how do we actually get it done? And in this terms, data and technology can take a big part. The biggest challenges, though, when we look from top to bottom, which they report in another study, was that they generally see an unclear ROI and a benefit of what they're doing. And that obviously is interesting because I think in this round, we don't need to discuss what the benefit is of decarbonization, but when we come into the organization or company in an economic context, that always plays a role as well. So that's something also when we talk about the value of data today, something we want to touch upon. The three following challenges that are reported are the lack of insights from data. So again, there's a lot of data out there. How can we make most of it? As well as the regulatory barriers and technology barriers. So we really want to make sure we give a sense of what are options to really address these initial challenges that we also hear through the studies, but also in our daily client conversations. And with that, for a bit more context on the actual regulatory and data requirements, I hand over to Hugo.
Thanks, Neele. Yeah, and just following on from that point, I think it's interesting that you see there that regulatory aspects are highlighted as a barrier, and I think that's kind of a reflection of the rise in the sort of level of requirements for companies to report ESG data and the complexity involved in that. Of course, prior to the regulation, there's seen a sort of a plethora of different reporting frameworks that exist and exist there to help companies understand what they need to report against. But of course, there is a lot of work for companies to be done to comply with those, and thankfully we're seeing a kind of consolidation of a lot of these different standards that exist in the market under, for example, the International Sustainability Standards Board, which is really helping companies, I think, to focus on what counts. But from the kind of, the reason why a lot of this interest in ESG data has emerged, I think we see three kind of main reasons for that. One of them is certainly a market driver. So there's this recognition that risk and financial performance is inextricably linked actually to sustainability related issues. And that's particularly something that investors are looking for more rigorous data on companies' environmental, social and governance performance to integrate into their investment decision making. Then, of course, the regulatory drivers are really significant and growing. And just to name a couple here, of course, I'm sure we've all heard of the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which sits under the EU's Green Deal. And this is really a kind of a ramping up on the level of rigor and the extent of data points that companies now need to report against going forward, with reporting beginning in 2025 and requiring 2024 data to be reported on for many large companies. And kind of the scope and number of businesses that will need to comply with the Corporate Sustainability Directive compared to its kind of predecessor, the Non-Financial Reporting Directive, is increasing to 50,000 from about 11,000. So it's much broader a number of companies that are going to have to start reporting this data for the first time. And the number of data points is really extensive. So it's kind of important for companies to move as quickly as they can to start collecting this data, particularly getting set up this year with the right reporting structures in place so that they can have good data collection from 2024 and then start to report that in 2025 onwards. And I think the one of the things I'd also highlight around the CSRD is the need to report on Scope 3 emissions. So typically for many businesses, we see like around, could be 80% plus of a company's emissions are related to Scope 3, and that could be much higher for certain sectors. But it's obviously a complex process to collect this data. And so moving and starting to collect that as soon as possible is really advisable. And then you have other examples of regulation that's emerging in other parts of Europe. So in Switzerland, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures has also become a mandatory reporting framework from 2024. The UK is obviously already using that. So it's great to see that a lot of these best practice frameworks and recommendations are now being adopted in kind of from a regulatory disclosure perspective as well. And if we move into the next slide, I just want to emphasize, though, that the point here is it's not all about disclosure and kind of compliance. The way that we see this at IBM is that a huge amount of value can be gained from the collection of this data and the use of it in order to help a business to operate more effectively, more profitably, with reduced costs, and in a more innovative way to develop new products and services. So we think about this in terms of this maturity curve, that the first stage is quite focused on compliance, data collection, and meeting those regulatory obligations. And for many companies, at this point, the level of digital maturity may be quite low. There may not be kind of any real digitization of ESG data collection or calculation of emissions. Many activities may be done in Excel. And quite manually, but creating that robust data foundation and ensuring that good quality data points are being established in the first step is really helpful when you move into stage 2, which is much more about optimization. And we see a lot of companies that are now setting themselves up with enhanced data collection methods across the value chain, using new reporting tools that are coming on the market that actually help to automate, for example, the calculation of emissions, help to identify hotspots of emissions within operations and in the value chain. And that also enables more effective tracking of emissions reductions over time, particularly against targets. And then from when we move on to the next stage, this is really about sort of transforming the organization. So once we have a robust kind of data foundation, we have reporting that's starting to be automated and done most efficiently, then we can start to really use that data and embed it into core decision making across the company. And I think that's particularly important for sourcing and for procurement. And we'll share a couple of examples of clients we work with that have managed to get quite far in this process. And really starting to use that information to steer procurement in line with their net zero and their science-based targets. Just moving on to the next slide as well, I just wanted to briefly kind of reiterate this point around the ROI, because as Neele mentioned earlier, one of the kind of barriers that that our executives reported through the survey we did on why it's difficult to operationalize a sustainability strategy is the lack of ROI. Whereas actually, I think there's a lot of evidence now out there that show that by operating more sustainably, there are really clear benefits in terms of revenue, for example, increase. And we found in this survey, actually, that when we asked the participants to report on their revenue compared to among those that, as we defined as trailblazers, so really leading the charge, compared to those that were kind of more of the laggards, they on average reported 20% higher revenue. And these are companies that have strong board level commitment. They're tapping the potential of emerging technologies and data, and they are collaborating with their suppliers and ecosystems to drive change. So actually there is a lot of clear sort of business case for what we're talking about here. And when we're working with clients, we just wanted to highlight a few of the key kind of action areas that we tend to focus on, just touching on these really briefly. Obviously, setting up the clear sustainability strategy and roadmap, so what's material for the organization, including in the supply chain, and then setting specific targets around addressing those impacts. And then the piece that we'll talk about a bit more in this webinar is this ESG data reporting and risk management aspect. So getting hold of that data and then operationalizing it so that you can then use it to identify, for example, how you can better improve your management of assets. So more effective energy use through intelligent real estate. You can also look at responsible computing. So more effective energy efficient servers or software tools that can help you improve the energy efficiency of the applications that you're running, for example. And then very importantly, again, this topic of supply chain, not just from a kind of environmental perspective, but looking at human rights. There are laws in Germany at the moment, for example, the Lieferkettengesetz, which kicked in at the beginning of this year, requiring a deeper level of due diligence on human rights and environmental impacts in the supply chain too. So this is kind of like the what, if you like. And now really excited to get into more of the how we can start to use the data that we're collecting. So if we move to the next slide, Neele and I wanted to spend the next little while just talking you through the different steps that we think about when we're working with clients in terms of how to get the most value out of supplier data. And the first aspect, of course, is around data collection. So there's a lot of challenges to do with data availability, quality, collection processes, and different calculation methods you can use, particularly when it comes to scope 3. So really assessing what your available data options are for supply chain emissions, and prioritizing where you want to access primary data from suppliers that maybe you have a higher spend with or have higher impact in terms of the sectors that they're working with. And then using industry averages where available as well to kind of plug any gaps, perhaps even further upstream from your suppliers, or just for products and services that you're not able to get primary data from. So data collection, really key first step. And then once you have that, it's really about how you integrate those different data sources. I think when it comes to scope 3, a lot of this is a sort of kind of like policy decision making that happens internally around what data you want to prioritize using, and where you kind of create your data hierarchy in terms of which data points you would use based on the quality or your kind of level of confidence in that data, compared to other data sources that might be available. And a lot of this information is coming in different formats from different places. There's a really key exercise there around integrating that and trying to make that as less sort of manual as possible. The data engine component is really focused on automating a lot of the calculation processes that when it comes to scope 3. So pulling the right emissions factors from the right places, integrating with your spend data, for example, to help allocate emissions at a supplier level. And then I think it starts to get really interesting from point 4 onwards, where we're visualizing that information. We have that good data foundation, and we can start to not only extract that information from for our reporting against the CSRD or the TCFD, but also use it to model and simulate different purchasing strategies. So we can prioritize different types of suppliers based on their environmental impacts, and balance that against our kind of any constraints we have with regard to cost and spend with those different suppliers. And then once you start to kind of use these modeling and simulation tools, you can then identify which suppliers you really need to focus your efforts on in terms of helping them to reduce their emissions over time, and where the biggest potential is to reduce emissions in line with your scope 3 targets. So that's where the kind of capacity building and support with suppliers comes into play as well. And just to kind of kick off the data collection piece before I hand back over to Neele, we've just included on the next slide a quick sort of overview of some of the different data sources that you can think about when calculating scope 3. I won't go into these in loads of detail, but the main message I just wanted to share is that there are a lot of different kind of options out there that need to be kind of consolidated and integrated when you're doing your reporting. So most companies will be using a combination of supplier-specific data and then averages data, and then working in Excel to kind of combine those and create their scope 3 inventory. This is, again, a process that can be automated and made much more efficient, and where the human error can be removed from a lot of these calculations. But the kind of the gold standard we would encourage clients to work towards is to use as much of this primary data, product level data, if available, as possible, but to prioritize where it really makes sense to collect that information from. Many organizations are working with tens of thousands of suppliers, and it may not be possible to get product level information from all of those. Usually a small percentage will have access to that. But the key thing is, where is the majority of the spend going? Which sectors are those are the highest impact in your supply chain? And then narrow that down to several hundred or potentially 1,000 or so suppliers to start working with, and then utilize some of these other data sources, such as averages data from lifecycle databases that exist on the market, or spend-based methods like environmentally extended input-output models, very commonly used to fill the gaps. So with that, I'll hand back over to yourself, Neele. I think you may be muted.
Yes, I am. Thank you. So as you just mentioned, and I think as you can all imagine, both on the kind of data quality or data content, there is a current status and there is a targeted status. The same holds true for the technology. And I'm coming back a bit into our role as technologists. When we talk about data collection, you can, and most probably if you are one of those who already work with or even experienced with working with data, you can really see yourself in data collection as being a manual effort and collecting it by yourself, asking in different departments, asking your suppliers in this case to bring it all together. And I mean, we are here today with the climate choice to already kind of address one of these components and kind of reducing this effort of manually bringing back together. Our target state would always be, and always a recommendation, to think about data collection in an as automated way as possible, to make this as efficient as possible, as also auditable. So if we look back into the reporting requirements, auditability is one key requirement, and auditability is easiest to do if you do a system supported as well as automated, and you don't have a lot of people kind of mushing around and sending things back and forth, obviously. From a technology perspective, There are different things, and I don't want to go into too much detail on that, but just to give you an idea, obviously, we are looking into integrating different sources of data. And if we look, again, a bit away from the scope 3 and the only supplier related data, but generally there are like over 500 data points that you can think of that there are inside and outside your organization that you can pull in to actually get the data done. And obviously it's always a huge effort in the beginning to kind of map your data initially, understand what do you need, which data point need to come towards that, what's the maturity of them. But once you have done that, you kind of build kind of a, let's say, a shell, and you can have it like as a template and then work on your data quality, work on the data accuracy, come from secondary data slowly into primary data, but the overall setup that's there already. And if you think about, for example, for transportation data or for waste data or for using weather data. So this all can also come in and can be combined. And then obviously technology supports that you can work with structured data and unstructured data, that you can use also different analytics and AI tools. You can kind of think about using automated sense check mechanisms via semantic analysis, so that if the data comes in, it's not people who need to check certain things, but you can also build that in. So all of that really working on the data quality, because as we said, that's only the beginning of the whole cycle. And crap in, crap out, if you can make sure the initial starting point is improving in quality and accuracy, that helps you throughout the whole part. And maybe just already very briefly addressing a question from the chat where it came to how do we work in this platform with, for example, CDP or other frameworks. So that's obviously one of the core sources for us, or one of the core requirements to make sure that for the frameworks, that these kind of data platforms, and it's not just one, it's very kind of individually built for certain requirements, but that with different frameworks, with different requirements, that is either an input source or a, let's say, framework template on how data is structured and how requirements are included into these platforms. But we can come back later to that question again as well. So if we now look into this whole piece of the engagement that we do need for collecting data, there are actually 3 layers. So we now came from the technology bit, but having said that, that's an important one. That's maybe the baseline. That's something that can help us to automate and to make it more efficient. But there are always other layers. And we all know that data collection won't work without any kind of engagement or any kind of communication. That's why we see 2 other layers, which are very critical in order to have the supplier engagement successfully. There is another layer of the business value, we call it, and you can think about it like, how do I actually bring suppliers or other third parties on this platform or into a network and provide data? What's the incentive? What's a penalty? What's the reason to act? What's in it for me? And I think to work on that, that's always the lever, and to be very clear on that, the lever to really communicate about that. And then the third layer we see that's really critical is around the process and governance. So really be clear on what's the process, what are the rights, what's the split on intellectual property when it comes to data, who's owning which data, who can see which data. So all of this different discussion need to be as clarified as possible, so all parties in the process feel engaged and feel in the end safe to work with the data here. And maybe just to add one last piece, if we're in this kind of more human side of engaging in collecting data, obviously that's also one bit in the technology piece, which becomes more and more important, that it's, as long as it's automated and in the background, that's one part, but then there's obviously one piece also around the usability and the human experience with the technology, on how easy it is to use, how much fun is it to use? Do I need like 500 steps to click through it, or is it just one button? So these are all things to consider. And we brought one example for you where this engagement piece, both on a technology as well as on a business, as well as on a governance level, has been done quite successfully. It's the example of PharmaConnect. PharmaConnect is an organization that has been founded like 4 or 5 years ago. Their focus is on digitalizing and making the supply chain for coffee more transparent. Their main goal is to connect the farmer eventually with the end customer. And their first part is on kind of really giving each step in the supply chain transparency, always with a view on data privacy and security. So really the data that is supposed to be shared and supposed to be seen by the different parties is the one which is shown. But the core mechanism here really is to link back to the engagement, the technology, give the farmers like really in the lowest tier in the supply chain an opportunity to hand in their data in an easy way, have a reason to do that, and also kind of have the technology at hand to do so. So here it has been done via an easy setup with an app. The farmers can give in their data. I won't pick up on each of the steps across the supply chain, but then when it comes to the end customer, and that's also one of the most incentives for the farmer, the customer not only sees the information on the product, which he is interested in, and maybe it's differentiating for the product. If you can see the origin, you can see the product carbon footprint, you can see other information on the product. But here it links back, and that's a really smart way of engaging, links back to the farmer with a mechanism which you can see here. It's called Thank My Farmer. And the idea is to tip directly your farmer, to really kind of send back money to the farmer, not only to your barista, who kind of creates the coffee in the end, but also to the one who actually grows the coffee. And that obviously, again, is a nice incentive for the farmer and the community in itself. So I hope this example could give you the different layers of engagement and data collection. And with that, we'll go over into our circle back into the next bucket, and that's visualization and reporting. Because again, it comes to all the data is collected. Data itself is not a value per se, but visualizing in the first instance obviously help to work with that. And for that, we brought you one, let's say, very almost basic case study of an electronics manufacturing company who were working on bringing their emission data together. Very classic challenges like siloed systems, own Excels and self-built tools, limited visibility on the data that they actually needed. So everything around, we call that data governance as well. So unclear ownership of the data was their situation. And they needed to have something more on spot. So to first of all, understand their baseline, where are they at, to work towards their targets, and then also understand what's their current and kind of historic performance. And in this case, there was a platform with the kind of the focus on really giving them visualizing support so they can see their performance and can work with the data. And we brought you a couple of examples really, because again, we don't want to kind of sell one platform here specifically, but rather give you the idea of that this visualization helps in the end to really inform and work with the data and bring it into reporting and strategy. And all of you are going to be familiar with dashboards in general. Here are two examples where it's really linked to scope 3 and supplier data. So for example, on the left side, seeing the emissions by scope 3 category and understanding kind of where the biggest levers are and where to kind of focus also the activities on the strategy and on the roadmap, because as we said in the beginning, and Hugo pointed out, if we have been doing reporting, we collected the data, we haven't really done anything yet. So there is no achievement in terms of sustainability if we have done the data work. So to really put our emphasis on where we need to go. This is really helpful. On this right side, you also see that, for example, the emissions by supplier. And again, with that, you can obviously focus and prioritize on where you put your emphasis in your work, or also not your emphasis going forward. And another visualization, what we find quite helpful, is not only on the let's say content related data towards your roadmap, but also on the data accuracy and quality. Hugo mentioned the 4 different dimensions on scope 3 data and where you can get them, and they are also linked, obviously, depending on whether it's primary data or secondary data, on the accuracy and also the ease on how you actually get them. So there is options to visualize this status of your own data management and to get an idea of how accurate and how easy the data currently is collected. And then again, how can you improve that, where it's important to improve that, which data maybe you can kind of internally pull and make from secondary to primary data, and which is maybe not as important and you can leave it as it is. So really also, again, using visualized data to focus your activities. And all of this is kind of looking on as is and historic data. And Hugo now will also give a view on how can we not only use it for the past and the current situations, but really include it into future planning.
Mm-hmm. And this is the bit which for me where it gets really interesting is, we have that kind of good data that we're pretty confident in. It's comprehensive, and now we can actually start to really use that to help sort of guide our decision making around where we can take action to reduce our impacts in the supply chain and balance that alongside other really key important sort of business considerations as well. And so this is where this kind of simulation and modeling aspect comes in and links into supplier engagement. And we wanted to share with you one really exciting example of a client that we've been working with, which is a global consumer packaged goods firm, which had set a net zero target, so looking to be net zero by 2050. And they wanted to really focus on the supply chain aspect because they have 80% of their emissions concentrated in scope 3 category 1, so in the supply chain aspect. Very challenging for them to work with their sort of supply chain to reduce emissions, but I think the key tool that they were looking for is how they could model emissions scope 3 over the future by making different supplier purchasing decisions, and how that would actually impact on their purchasing costs as well. So we developed a tool that models both CO2 projections and the costs of working with different suppliers. So essentially, the client can now decide to work with specific suppliers based on what the likely cost implications would be and what that implications that would have for their scope 3 emissions component of their net zero goal. And what I really like about this example is that it really takes the data outside of the just the sustainability team working with that, or the reporting or the compliance team. It's really starting to embed this data into kind of the ways of working of a really key function within the organization, and starting to kind of utilize that information as an equal or really important factor alongside other more traditional metrics that they would also be working with, such as the quality of the supply or ethics in the supply chain, costs and reliability. So really interesting to see this come to fruition. And one of the things I'd also like to mention talking about this is we talk a lot about scope 3, and scope 3 is a really useful way for us to think about impacts in our supply chain. But there are other metrics we can also consider that are, I think, very, very valuable to get a sense of where our suppliers are sort of heading in the future. So I would sort of advise clients not to be overly focused on like the current emissions of a specific supplier, but rather also to think about what kinds of interventions are these suppliers planning to put into place over time? What targets do they have? Are those also aligned with our ambitions as an organization? And so we can really actually start to predict where suppliers are likely to be in the next 5-10 years' time, and continue to work with those rather than just ruling them out based on a snapshot in time of their current impacts. So encourage you also when you're thinking about your supplier engagement strategies to think more broadly than just the pure kind of emissions metric, although that is, of course, a very helpful one. And then another example we also wanted to share, which again, I think really illustrates this kind of end goal of really embedding sustainability into the tools that procurement colleagues and purchasing colleagues are already working with, is this piece of work we did with Iberdrola. So we worked with them to deploy SAP Ariba sourcing solutions for source to contract processes. And one of the really key pieces of this work is that we helped to integrate the SAP Ariba solutions with a third-party supplier sustainability tool. So this gave purchasing colleagues a deeper insight into the environmental impact of the supply chain, and helped to inform their purchasing decisions and ensure that the certain number of that their target number of suppliers were demonstrating a commitment to sustainability. And again, this is, it's not the data sitting in a kind of siloed but beautiful sustainability reporting tool. This is it being pulled into kind of business as usual ways of working for a key function. And I think maybe I just sort of end the examples on that note with a final slide in terms of our kind of point of view on this, which is indeed really important first step to set up a good kind of reporting system and ESG dashboard that enables you to kind of visualize where your impacts are and report against these emerging standards, etc. But we don't want that dashboard to remain siloed either. And best practice really is about trying to pull that information into a more kind of like a balanced scorecard approach, where ESG data is being looked at alongside other really key operational KPIs. And this is kind of, the North Star that we're looking to support clients to get to. I've worked with clients in the past that do give ESG equal kind of weighting alongside these other types of KPIs, particularly for procurement. And that I think is really helpful when also those companies are engaging with their suppliers, so they can go into conversations with their counterparts in those suppliers and give them a kind of a score in terms of how they're performing across a range of different aspects on this balanced scorecard, including the ESG components. And that really helps to cascade change and improve supplier performance as well. So as a kind of a closer, we had a final poll for our kind of prepared content on the final slide. So circling back to this kind of maturity curve, I think, Lara, if we're able to bring up, there we go, beautiful, right on cue. Final poll, just to see, yourselves as organizations, where would you kind of place yourselves on this journey from being focused quite very much on the compliance side and getting the data in order to report on against your reporting obligations, through to kind of using that data to sort of start making some optimization improvements in your companies, through to really embedding that fully into different departments and functions, and feeling that data is really being used to its maximum across finance, supply chain and procurement, risk, etc. Great, thanks. Some really interesting results, and I think this very much reflects also how we the clients that we're working with as well. So quite a strong focus on stage 1 and stage 2, so the compliance and the optimization piece, which is very much what we recommend starting with. So there's kind of I guess with some of the clients we work with, a tendency to want to kind of move really quite fast forward into the sustainability transformation piece, but that doesn't really make sense until you've got that solid data foundation and you have good data to work with. So stage 1 and stage 2, many of the clients we're working with are also at that step as well. But I think I'll close it there and just say many thanks to everybody for your attention and for listening. It's been great to speak with you, and looking forward to some time for Q&A now.
Great. Yeah. Thanks a lot for you both presenting, I would say, a very complex and big topic in such a short time. So it was really, really insightful. And I think that is reflected in the tons of questions we actually got. So amazing work also from everyone in the audience. I try to keep track and have like everything written down. But yeah, for sure, the time will be not enough. So I very much recommend also later joining in the Slack group or reaching out directly to Neele and Hugo if you have more questions. And yeah, maybe what I took out and to summarize also what I heard, right? You recommended or you really highlighted that to start with, you now said it again, right? Compliance, to look which kind of data you really need, and then to optimize the collection point and not just send Excel tables around, but like go into automatization and like really have data you can work with and that you can also report later. But then to bring a really big emphasis on, okay, you have to work with it and specifically in procurement if you want to reach your suppliers and really make change, and climate action is also possible. And maybe for that, there are like some questions that turn around this point. So if you're still in that transition mode in the company where you now have to start using that data and implement all these processes, you touched on it that you saw there's an increase in ROI, a return of investment. And there was also, I think, maybe critical question, or someone got pressure from their own company, like asking what is actually the line between sustainability and profitability? Sorry, how can I really combine it? What are maybe the key arguments you need to bring towards your company to really make that transition now happening and use different data points and make different decisions from there?
Yeah, so happy to kind of kick off maybe on that last point. I think it's it's always been a slightly challenging thing for companies to show the exact cause and effect between operating in a more sustainable way and exactly what that can mean for profitability, unless it's associated with sales of a new like a greener product or cost reduction as a result of operating more, reducing your energy costs. I mean, those elements are quite easy to quantify. But often what we see is this very strong correlation between companies that are implementing best practices from a sustainability perspective and that being combined with an improved overall profitability of that business over time. So the correlation is there to the point where it's clear that it can be, sustainability is used as it can be used as a proxy in a way for really good management and good ways of operating an organization. But if you really want to show, I think, the return on investment, the two areas that we've sort of often would focus on would be cost savings as a result of implementing more efficient asset management, more efficient and sale of new products that are meeting market demand for greener products. When it comes from the supply chain perspective, I think also interestingly, going with a low carbon supply isn't necessarily always more expensive. I think through this example of the procurement kind of buyer tool that we shared, that actually helps the client to identify what's the low-hanging fruit in terms of where could we potentially shift our spend to work with a supplier that it does have a lower emissions footprint, but also is more cost effective. And then starting from that point, I think being able to demonstrate the ROI quickly can be quite, is doable for sure. But Neele, maybe you have some other comments to add there.
Maybe just to add one thought, because I think this is also one aspect that we see, especially in the, let's say, the overall mindset and how this is approached. Because if sustainability is kind of a project that needs to be achieved, then it's hard to get the ROI. The moment where it's not a sustainability strategy, but a sustainable corporate strategy, and it's a sustainable enterprise, then this really kind of blurs, and the kind of your general profit and your general ROI there's just kind of an alternative. So you kind of weave this into your general profitability, and with that, it directly comes, and be it with new business models, because you know that your organization is only future-proof if you can kind of stay there for the next 20, 30 years, then you obviously think about that in a different way than just kind of collecting your numbers towards what are the 3 next activities I need to do in the next year. So I think there's also like a huge difference that we see in this maturity.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We also see with customers that really this risk of not being part of that low carbon economy, which is obviously already forming, and to see like I will not be part of that market, like my clients already ask for it. And on the other hand, I have a huge power to really integrate it and position already and become a leader in that field to like really go ahead now. That this is like one of the key areas, that it's part of a strategic company-wide transformation. And that also from procurement, you empower now not only buying decisions, but like strategic, financial, and like business model decisions and how you build up your procurement data. I know that Hugo might have to jump out already. I would thank you from that point maybe, and take the next few questions for Neele. And yeah, again, everyone who wants to reach out to Hugo, you find him on LinkedIn and also on, I think, the email that was shared. So thanks very much, Hugo.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks to everybody for joining. Yeah, really happy. My contact details are here, so Neele's. So any further follow-up questions you have, please feel free to reach out, and look forward to discussing further.
Great.
I'll leave you in Neele and Laura's capable hands.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks. Yeah, and I just think I used the time still like for one or two questions maybe, because there were so many, and that's really cool to see. I mean, we talk now about like what is really the main argument to use it, and then when you go into the specifics, I mean, we had the whole process, right? You need to collect the data, and we use the term streamlining, so maybe to go into that one again, like why is that so important? And then also like which kind of different data sets you had. We have like historic and future oriented, like maybe to give for that process like one or two words to walk again through it, and what are the main highlights or things that people maybe should have in mind when they start this process or want to optimize it.
Yes, sure. So when it comes to streamlining it, I think especially maybe as a non-technologist or not a non-data engineer, if you think about you have the different sources and you kind of continuously get your new data input in that. If we don't define, and that's not only relevant or true for environmental or sustainability data, but generally if you don't define your kind of data basics on how you set up your structure, on what's your element, what's the granularity you want to have, you obviously with every kind of new input, you kind of start from scratch to build up your databases. So what we see as an especial challenge in this field is that there are no standards out there yet, that kind of every company starts to pull together. And we have seen spreadsheets, which are, I would say, magic spreadsheets. So I was very impressed, but they're still a spreadsheet, and they are involved a lot of work on bringing this together. So really our initial point is don't start thinking about the dashboards. Obviously it's the target state, but let's think about how you get your data in an orderly way in there. And it is some manual work and it's some think work, but once you've done that once, and that was I said earlier, like a template or a shell, then you can kind of pull this always back in and then really focus on filling up this data. So I think the work here really is to understand your data setup. And this comes with a really other important and interesting part, especially on the sustainability data, that they're often, and that would be also a question back in a good discussion to you in your organizations, no real data governance on that yet, meaning no clear ownership on who's there for the quality, who kind of takes decision on what are kind of the leading data elements, who is involved in kind of competing data, who streamlines this data. So I think that's also a whole about the operating model around sustainability data, which needs to be addressed in organizations.
Great. Yeah, then we are almost at the end. So as said, I think there came in 20 questions or something. So we will also do our best to summarize everything. And this was for us as well. Like we're going to publish the recording and also the summary in our blog, Climate Magazine. You find it on theclimatechoice.com. And maybe for Neele, last question, if now that was a really hard hour to listen or to remember everything, what would be the one advice you give people to start with their supply chain data management?
Ooh, that's a good one for the for the end. Obviously, reach out if you kind of want to sort your thinking on that. I think as a very initial point, it's always really good to have an understanding in view of what data you need, just to kind of understand your own requirements from a regulatory perspective, but also what would help you. And that does not need to be scientific or technical, but what would help you to really focus on. And then, as I said, we kind of draw some parallels to the digital transformation, where you would say, think big and start small, really package of what you start with. And once you've implemented that, then go to the next bits and pieces.
I really love that last sentence. Start small and think big. I think for sustainability, really, the bigger the better. You really need these ambitious goals, and then you need to bring them into action. And just one step after the other will bring you to that goal. So that's really, really good advice for the end. Thank you so much for being here and to engage in that webinar. And yeah, thanks everyone who listened in and participated so actively. And yeah, if you want, we see each other back in 2 weeks. We will have a webinar with someone from practice, how to implement science-based targets, what are the challenges, how to bring the supply chain on. And yeah, then in a much bigger round in May on the summit. And yeah, thanks everyone for joining and driving that transformation forward. So thanks a lot, Neele.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Great.